to today's episode of Visified Tips, where technology, innovation, passion, and purpose come together. My name is Jamie Jennings, and I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing Strategy. I'll be your host each month as we talk to credit union leaders, researchers, fintech representatives, and many others about what is impacting credit unions today. On today's episode, my guest is Gautam Ajarappu, and Gautam is a co-founder and CEO of Glide, which is a fintech company that helps credit unions attract and onboard Gen Z and millennial members. And today, we will be learning how they do it, what the secret sauce is, and I cannot wait. So thank you for joining me today, Gautam. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Jamie.
Oh, I cannot wait. I'm so glad you're here. Before we even jump in, I've got to let the listeners know how we met. So we actually met at a South Carolina Lead Conference meeting, and I was doing a talk on how to speak the members' language in a digital world. And I was sharing with the listeners that Forbes magazine quoted that credit unions need to invest in voice memos in order to reach the Gen Z audience. And now Gen Z, of course, is anybody between the age of 9 and 24 years old. And what was fascinating to me is they said that 65% of Gen Z users use what's called a voice note to speak to their friends, their boyfriends, their girlfriends. And I was just telling the audience, this is crazy. What is a voice note? And Gautam was actually in the back, laughing his head off hysterically, nodding his head, clearly enjoying the conversation that we were having. And I looked at him and I said, okay, you're a Gen Z. Educate us. What is a voice note? So I feel like we need to start there because I feel like this is a concept that's very new to us. So Gautam, what is a voice note and why are Gen Zs using it?
Yeah, well, it's an amazing question, Jamie. And I remember that talk very well. It was actually one of the best credit union talks that I've gone to. And I remember thinking to myself, like, yeah, of course we use voice notes. But as I was looking around the room, no one was really, kind of affirming what you were saying. And I was like, am I the only one here that really understands this? Voice notes, voice memos, it's basically a way of sending texts that are audio rather than actual text that you can read. And I think it's just because Gen Z really likes things that are instantaneous and asynchronous, right? We like to do things on our own time and we like to respond to things on our own time. And so sometimes it's hard to hop on a FaceTime or hop on a video chat and talk synchronously. And so instead, voice memos are a way where we can still have that personal touch with people, but we can do it in a way that kind of fits our own schedules. So maybe it's a little bit of laziness, but I think that ability to, listen to the voice note several times, come up with a good response to it on your own time is something that the Gen Z really likes about it.
Okay, now let me just unpack this. Let me back up a little bit more just to help our listeners clearly understand. So, for example, if you had a problem at a credit union, instead of calling the credit union, you would want the ability in your own time to basically record what the problem is and then send it to the credit union. And it can be up to 10 minutes long. Is that kind of what a voice note is?
Yeah. And I think, rather than having to wait for someone to pick up a phone on the other end, whether it be at a credit union or really any other institution that you want to resolve a problem or get more information about, I think these types of institutions need to adopt this kind of asynchronous communication because Gen Z doesn't want to wait for, say, a 10-minute wait time if all the agents are on hold at your call center. I'll even give an example here. Yeah. Yesterday, I was trying to book a flight to actually the Visify conference coming up in June. Yeah. And I booked the round trip and then I realized actually from the conference, I need to fly somewhere else. And so I wanted to cancel the back half of that round trip, right? But not the entire thing. And I couldn't do that through the JetBlue portal that I was booking through. And so it had me talk to a customer service agent and me and, any of my friends, when we hear that word, like talk to a customer service representative, there's an audible groan that comes out of us, right? We're like, that's the last thing that we want to have to do. And so I clicked on it begrudgingly. And what happened is the customer service portal actually opened up in my iMessage app, on my text messaging app. And it started a text conversation with a JetBlue agent. And it was like within the iMessage app, it was fully branded to the JetBlue experience. Like they had a little verified tick, so I know I made sure that I wasn't talking to like some scammer or something like that. And I had the most fluid customer experience I've ever had before, where in between messages where I was waiting for the JetBlue representative to respond, I could just click one box lower and start talking to my best friend. And so that's the kind of level of customer service and asynchronous communication that I think our generation is really looking for.
Oh, wow. See, well, I love that you said that and gave us an actual example because, I'm a millennial. So the voice notes make no sense to me because we like efficiency and we want text or chat where we can read it and kind of get to the point. But you were saying with the voice memo, just like the JetBlue experience, while you were waiting on that text chat, you could do other things. So you like the efficiency component too. It's just in a different way.
Exactly, right. And I think voice notes have a place to play there, in that voice notes are admittedly not something that I'm using every single day, right? But in the same manner of that, like asynchronous communication, where hey, if I want to send something and then I want to do other things while I'm waiting for a response, the text messages work when there's something short. But if there's something really long or a more deeper conversation that I want to have, that's the kind of role that voice notes play. And so how I think this fits in here is for a lot of the smaller requests, if you open up that iMessage channel, if you figure out as a credit union how to integrate with that same iMessage bot that JetBlue and a lot of other big organizations are doing, that would handle all the smaller ticket requests from customers. But if you really want to get Gen Z, you really want to appeal to them, you could even do things like taking in loan applications via voice note if you need to collect information about them, or doing other kinds of product servicing that require more back and forth using voice notes in addition to text.
Oh, now come on. Now that's a game changer. See, to me, that's just a completely foreign concept. Actually using voice memos for a loan application, but I like it. You kind of got my wheels turning. So let me ask you this. Let's stay on that thread because what we talked about is your company Glide actually helps credit unions reach Gen Z and millennials. And that's something we all want to do because we feel like this is a whole nother world of things that we need to learn. So if you were to go in and sit down with a credit union, what are some of the things that to kind of help get started? What are some things that Gen Z millennials are looking for?
Yeah, it's a good question. And maybe, Jamie, if I could even back up 1 second here and kind of just talk about how I got here, because I think that's a big reason why we're confident in our approach to helping credit unions. So we previously came from a background of just building products for Gen Z. As we started building products for Gen Z over the last 10 years, we realized that our generation is looking for a completely different level of product experience and messaging when it comes to actually hearing about that product, right? And this spanned across a variety of different industries. We had a lot of success doing this in ed tech, where we built this marketing and tutoring platform that ended up getting over 1 million students learning on it, all the way to things like fintech, right? Where we realized the existing banking apps and the ways that you manage your finances today are not what Gen Z is looking for in terms of a fun, social, gamified experience. And that kind of brought us to the credit union world, right? Where we realized that credit unions, although from a value perspective, are extremely aligned with these next generations, right? They're community-driven organizations. They're not-for-profits. They have excellent member service. From a marketing and technology perspective, they're very lacking, right? And as a result, even though credit unions are very well poised to capture the next generation, the group of financial, I wouldn't even call them institutions, but financial companies that are capturing the next generation are these groups of neobanks, right? These fintech applications that don't have their own charter, that rely on an existing financial institution's charter, but really just own the user experience and marketing components of it, are the ones that are now have like 200 million Gen Z millennial members all over the world on their platforms. And so to answer your question, Jamie, how do we advise credit unions and what do we tell credit unions? The quite simple answer is, hey, you need to take a page out of the neobank playbook. You need to look at the marketing channels that they're using. And oftentimes they're channels that credit unions have not even opened yet, right? So looking at things like Instagram ads, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, Product Hunt, these kind of new age channels that credit unions have very little, if at all, presence on. And then second, making your technology a lot more frictionless. And where we like to specialize and where we think the most important piece of the puzzle is onboarding, because a Gen Z or millennial member can tell whether you're a tech forward or not tech forward company in the first minute of interacting with you. And so everything from that first touch point of a relatable marketing campaign all the way to a really frictionless onboarding process, that is that golden time period where you can convert that member. And everything after that, your credit union can speak for itself in terms of its values and member service. But that is the time where we see a lot of Gen Z members considering a credit union, but quickly turning away because they don't have that good onboarding funnel.
No, I like it. And let me rewind you a little bit just to kind of go back, because you said a lot of good nuggets that I want to make sure that we pull out. So one of the things that you mentioned was to do marketing a little bit differently. I know traditionally we do different marketing campaigns, different email drip campaigns. We're getting into text messaging, but you talked about utilizing some different social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. Let's talk about that, because I know that some credit unions are putting some ads on social media, maybe Instagram and Facebook, but how does a credit union go about doing that? Because statistics show that if they do it the wrong way, they got to know how to use the platform effectively, right? You can't use the same ad across all channels. So if someone were to get started of utilizing social media, give me a basic 101 class of how to get started.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I will start by saying it does vary quite a bit based on each credit union, right? For a number of reasons. Maybe the highest or the most namely one that I can think of is the eligibility requirements. So making sure that you're attracting members that you can actually onboard to your credit union. But how we started back in the day, we used to build one of our own banking apps, right? Before we entered the credit union space, we were building what we thought was the future of Gen Z banking, which included a lot of social elements, a lot of gamification elements, and we found an even bigger opportunity to do that in the credit union space. We started by just taking inspiration from the existing neobanks, by almost standing on the shoulders of the giants, right? Or I guess giants just in the realm of marketing. Um, so the first thing we did is we went on Facebook ad library. We went on the TikTok marketing creator page, where it's actually amazing how much information you can get about ad campaigns there. You can look up every ad that all the top neobanks have run on Facebook and TikTok. You can look up how many views that ad got. You can look up even things like the click-through rate of that ad. What does the conversion look like? And so that's where we started. We did a huge audit of all of our favorite neobanks, right? And these kinds of neobanks are pretty easy to find online. The highest growing ones, there's a lot of like teen focused, Gen Z focused neobanks as well. Step, Current, Chime are like the three that are some of our favorites. And we did a huge audit. We spent a couple of weeks just sitting down and pulling together all the content that had the most amount of views and just doing a lot of reflection internally about, hey, why did this get so many views? Is it the messaging? Is it the script? Is it the influencers that they brought on, which I'm happy to talk about later as well. And really starting there, right? And going from there and thinking about, hey, which parts of this can we extract? Which parts of these products are they promoting that we could also promote? And I'm definitely not saying to just rip them off or copy them by any sense, but I think it's a really good starting point, because these companies have put millions and millions and millions of dollars into figuring out what hits, right? And I think from there is step one. Now, step two, which might be a little hard for credit unions to really wrap their head around, but I think it's super essential, is getting someone who can speak their language, right? Understanding what makes marketing successful is completely different than coming up with new marketing materials from the ground up. So a couple credit unions that we've talked to, we've been very upfront with them and said, hey, look, I think if you guys are really serious about Gen Z millennials, I think you need to hire a 23-year-old marketing manager. I think you need to go out there and find someone who has made TikToks themselves before, who has a big following on Twitter and TikTok. These are the types of things we looked for when we actually brought people onto our own Glide team. All right. So I think it involves taking someone that might have a little bit less industry experience, but knows the audience super well enough to speak their language. And so I think, with that audit, with bringing someone on, with expanding the team, along with the right technology providers, right? And that kind of brings me to step three, which is once you have a bunch of people coming to the door, you want to actually be able to convert them into members. And so doing a lot of research along with that, marketing manager, whoever it may be, to identify the right the right vendors and the right partners that can help you actually provide the value prop that you're promoting on these new social media platforms.
Oh, I love that. That's great advice. Well, and I like too that onboard someone on your team that is a Gen Z so they can speak that language and they can help along the way. You mentioned influencers, and this is a buzzword in the market right now, and everybody's talking about utilizing influencers and the impact that it can make. And I'm going to be honest with you, when you showed me the stats of the success that you guys had on one influencer campaign in one night and how many people it attracted, I'm going to be honest with you, my mouth fell open. I guess I just didn't understand the power of influencers and how well they work. Can you talk about what is an influencer? How does it work? Just so the listeners kind of get a good understanding.
Yeah, great question, Jamie. So first, let me start with the definition, right? What do I mean by influencer? Because I think when people hear the word influencer, there are two major misconceptions. How I define influencer is just someone that's able to create relatable content on social media platforms. And maybe we can even narrow in on Instagram and TikTok to start, because that's where the majority of these Gen Z millennials live. There's two misconceptions about influencers that I'd like to clear up. One is that influencers equal celebrities. That's not the case at all, right? There's this whole group of individuals called micro influencers, which I'll talk about shortly, that don't have the financial requirements of a celebrity, that don't have the necessary, that don't basically, that move a lot faster than influencers. And so that's misconception number one. Misconception number two is that promoting via influencers is a mass market message that might not hit with the demographics that you guys are targeting. And so let me talk a little bit about the strategy that we've done and show you how those two things weren't true in this situation. So back when we were promoting our own neobank, the Gen Z banking app that I referred earlier, we used a group of influencers called user-generated content influencers, UGC creators. And what these creators do is they find products that they really like and they promote them on their social media platforms. So if you go onto their social media platform, they have something like 50,000 to 200,000, maybe sometimes even more followers on TikTok, on Instagram, and their entire content is just a bunch of random products that they like. And over time, they've developed this relationship with their followers, with their viewers, that they have a good eye for new products. And so their viewers and followers really like when they put out new content, because they know this is someone they trust. They know this is someone that's product review is going to speak a lot to them. And so what we did was we found a bunch of these UGC creators. We set up an incentive structure where whenever they were converting users to our platform, we would pay them a certain amount of money, a level of money that we were comfortable with as far as user acquisition costs. And only on successful conversion did we even have to pay for people. And so it was a very aligned model where both parties won. And these are creators that are very small relative to celebrities, right? Still have, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of followers, but don't have the budget requirements of working with a A-list celebrity. And second, these are UGC creators that are hyper targeted, right? So we found for our use case, we needed to find fintech influencers. We needed to find people that were promoting financial products to their viewers and followers. And so at some point, we had a group of a couple dozen UGC creators that were creating content. And how that applies to credit unions is finding the right set of UGC creators. And this is, again, something that we help credit unions do. But finding for example, let's say you are a credit union in Los Angeles that is serving primarily students and the Los Angeles community. You're going to want to find influencers that promote products to younger people in Los Angeles, right? And thankfully, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of those. Anyone can become a micro-influencer these days or a UGC creator these days. And so there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of them across the country, a lot of whom we work with. And so it's just a matter of finding the right people and setting up the structure in such a way where you're only needing to spend money when they're bringing you the members that you're looking for. And so that's when it comes to influencer, that's what I recommend. And of course, some of the bigger credit unions have had success going straight to celebrities, paying them millions and millions of dollars in order to run campaigns. And I think when a credit union gets to that size, that's a phenomenal idea. But, I kind of want to speak to some of the smaller credit unions out there. You guys can get involved in this stuff without having to spend that amount of money and without having to put that amount of effort into it. just because of this new rise of these micro influencers, these UGC creators that can help you a lot.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, that was really good information. And I want to back up to your second point. So the first point you said of how to reach Gen Z and millennials, right, is number one is to market to them where they're at. And you had talked about Instagram and TikTok's probably your main leading channels right now for Gen Z. But the second thing you said was very important. You said the second and most important part is the member experience, that within the first minute, they make a decision if they want to bank with your credit union or not. So tell me, let's talk about what Gen Z looks for in an onboarding experience. What's different than Gen Z than anybody else? Maybe the graphics or the workflow. What do you kind of look at?
Yeah, it's an interesting question and a really good question, Jamie. And I think, the funny thing that's kind of happened here is the product principles that Gen Z really looks for, they started as like a Gen Z millennial specific thing. And eventually, I think everyone realized that, hey, actually, these product principles just make everyone's life a little bit easier, right? And what I'm kind of referring to here is the biggest thing is simplicity, right? When it comes to the onboarding experience, can I get through the product in a matter of minutes? Maybe even like 1 to 2 minutes, rather than filling out a really long, complicated form that takes me 10 to 15 minutes, or even some credit unions and banks today, you have to walk into a branch or call a teller when something goes wrong. These are all the things that add a lot of friction that Gen Z millennials are not going to be able to sit through. And what's interesting here is that for a while, all of these members who had these gripes with the onboarding process almost had no choice, right? It was like, hey, I have to sit through this because there's really no other option for me, and I really like this financial institution. I hate to break it to everyone here, but today that's not the case anymore, right? If there's even one hurdle to getting onboarded onto a financial institution, the Gen Z or millennial member is going to turn around and download the Chime app and onboard onto Chime in 30 seconds. Right. And so there's now that kind of competitiveness in the marketplace that we're huge fans of credit unions, right? We think that they are the best place for especially younger members to go to early on in their careers. And so we want to help level the playing field, right? We want to help you guys be a competitive option next to all these different neobanks and fintechs. And yeah, I think that onboarding experience of just like, hey, can we onboard members purely from their phone, if possible, within a matter of 2 minutes, and afterwards quickly onboard them onto the other products, whether it be mobile banking, whether it be the LOS system, whether it be giving them cards as quickly as possible. Can we get them basically as ingrained in all of our systems as quickly as possible, to the point where once you open that account, that's amazing, but we also need them to be able to stick, right? We also want them to stay there and not open up another account. There's this really interesting stat that Gen Z millennials today, 65% of them have more than one financial institution. And so there's a lot less loyalty to financial institutions than previous generations, right? A lot of them will open up a Robinhood app for their investing, and then a banking app for their day-to-day banking, and wealth management app for some of their longer term stuff. And so you're dealing with an audience now that's able to quickly switch between financial institutions if one isn't meeting their needs. And so it's important to not only onboard them quickly, but then also connect them to all your other systems. And so they stay within your ecosystem, and they stay kind of engaged and active within your credit union.
I think that was well said. I mean, they grew up with technology, right? And it's always been at their fingertips, and they expect, like you said, a very simple, seamless, frictionless experience. And if they don't get it with you, then they'll get it somewhere else. And I like what you said too. They don't just use one financial institution, but multiple. And I also read this, and I want to see what you think about it, is recently a study was put out that Gen Z, of course, relies on technology in their phone. But what I thought was interesting is said that 88% of Gen Z still prefer not only the digital app experience, but also a physical branch. I think sometimes we have this misconception that, in Gen Z, all they want to do is interact with the digital application. But there are times where a Gen Z does want to go into a branch and see a person. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting statistic, Jamie, and I really appreciate you asking this question because, I think a lot of credit unions and even ourselves, honestly, can get caught up in this neobank idea, right? Like digitize everything, leave the in-person behind. And while I think it's true that Gen Z does prefer to do the majority of things digitally, Gen Z millennials are in an interesting position because their spending power is growing exponentially. I think currently it's around $3 trillion. And within the next 5 years, that number is going to 10x to $30 trillion. And so Gen Z is coming into this workforce with side hustles, with high paying jobs, making lots and lots of money. And they need to know how to manage that money. And a lot of them are actually, because of the increase in financial literacy, being pushed to things like, let me invest in a home. One of my friends is a 21-year-old who recently graduated college, and he actually, rather than buying an apartment, the first property he ever put money towards, except for his college dorm rooms, was a duplex in Austin. And he's planning on living there for a year or two and then renting it out to whoever will live there. And I think it's a really interesting thing that's happening now, where Gen Z millennials are at a much younger age than previous generations starting to think about getting involved with these bigger ticket items. And so I think for things like that, having an in-branch, exposure or being able to sit across from someone and make sure that this big decision you're making at a much younger age than maybe what your parents made the decision at is a really good idea. And I think that, credit unions can even find a way to link the two really well. I've seen a lot of credit unions send out scheduling links to their prospective younger members, right? Where a younger member can go on and find the time, say a 15, 30-minute, 45-minute time slot where he or she can book it himself and walk into a branch and get in and out very seamlessly without having to, wait in the line or fill out lots of forms beforehand. And so I think that having that having that in-person branch is really, really important, especially as this generation starts to think about these big purchases they're making.
I love that. So while digital is very important and that's our main line of communication, we still want the personal touch, especially with big financial decisions. And that makes a lot of sense. And this has been a really great session. I've learned a lot of how Gen Zs think a little bit differently. And just on the sidebar, just so that our listeners can get to know you personally a little bit better. All right, Gotham. So I know we've talked a lot about how to reach Gen Z, but on a personal note, just so that our listeners can get to know you a little bit better, who you are, I always like to ask the question, what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a great question. So this kind of goes back to when I first met my co-founder right now at Glide. His name is Samir. I met him back when I was 11 years old. And back then I was really into arts and crafts, like anything that I could make with my hands. I really enjoyed. So I was like, every day after school, I would come home, I would spend all my time making origami, making duct tape wallets. And I followed a lot of YouTubers, right? Like a lot of YouTubers would come out with hey, this is my new origami creation. And I would watch that video end to end, and then I would remake it on my own. And I think then I realized that I wanted to do that. I wanted to be one of those arts and crafts YouTubers when I was little. And I wanted to inspire, a next generation of people to do that kind of stuff in a world where, I grew up in the Bay Area. And so there's obviously a big engineering culture there, a big digital culture there. And so it was really nice to shut off the laptop after school and spend a few hours just folding paper. So that was what I wanted to do. And it's funny that now, a lot of influencer YouTuber stuff is still in my life. And maybe one day after all of this is over, I'll start up a YouTube channel and make my own origami and duct tape wallets.
Oh, I love it. Well, hey, you know what? You can design some origami into the gamification of onboarding. So maybe you can tie that in and create a win-win. But I love that. You're creatively helping credit unions reach younger members. So let me ask you this. Do you have any closing comments to leave today with our listeners of how to reach a younger membership?
Yeah, I think one thing maybe I didn't cover as much earlier is just keeping in mind that this is not a short process, right? Turning your credit union into a brand that really resonates with younger people and updating your technology such that you're able to also take action on those younger people that are now interested. It takes a while, right? And I think that credit unions really should factor that timeline in as they're thinking about these modernizations. And just keep in mind that like, hey, along the way, we've had many times where we've launched a marketing campaign and it's gone nowhere. And we launched a second marketing campaign that we were sure wouldn't do as well. And that one ended up getting millions of views, right? And same thing goes on the product side as well. So I think patience is important. Iteration is super important. How can we get to market with something really, really quickly and take multiple tries and factor in that we're going to need multiple tries to get this right? And I think as long as credit unions start early and keep in that mindset of like, hey, this might fail. Let's keep trying and trying and trying. And when it hits, it will be explosive. It will be exponential. It'll be amazing. That is really what works for this younger generation. Because, as much as I want to come up here and say, hey, I know everything that it'll take to get to them, at the end of the day, marketing a financial institution is difficult, right? And it takes multiple tries to get right. So I would just keep that in mind as you guys are undergoing this journey and thinking about how we can make these pretty substantial changes to your credit union.
I love it. So keyword, patience and persistence. Don't give up. We'll get there. Reaching members is hard across the board. Well, that is really great. And I thank you for joining us again today. I thank you for teaching us a lot. And I am looking forward to maybe at the client conference, maybe you doing an origami paper session. That could be fun too.
I would love to.
I would love it. I would love it. Well, I hope you have a great rest of the day. And thank you again so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Jamie. Have an amazing day.
You too. Bye.
A Huda Media Production.